and start to think about what progress is. What would it be like to be improving the human lot? And one of the problems that we face, I think, is that the only people that have cornered the market in terms of progress is a financial definition of what progress is, an economic definition of what progress is. That somehow, if we get the right numbers to go up, we're going to be better off. Whether that's on the stock market, whether that's with GDP and economic growth, that somehow life is going to get better. This is somehow appealing to human greed instead of fear, that more is better. Come on, in the Western world, we have enough. Maybe some parts of the world don't, but we have enough. And we've known for a long time that this is not a good measure of the welfare of nations. In fact, the architect of our national accounting system, Simon Kuznets, in the 1930s said that a nation's welfare can scarcely be inferred from their national income. But we've created a national accounting system which is firmly based on production and producing stuff. And indeed, this is probably historical. It had its time. In the Second World War, we needed to produce a lot of stuff. And indeed, we were so successful at producing certain types of stuff that we destroyed a lot of Europe and we had to rebuild it afterwards. And so our national accounting system became fixated on what we can produce. But as early as 1968, this visionary man, Robert Kennedy, at the start of his ill-fated presidential campaign, gave the most eloquent deconstruction of gross national product that ever has been. And he finished his talk with the phrase that the gross national product measures everything except that which makes life worthwhile. How crazy is that our measure of progress, our dominant measure of progress in society, is measuring everything except that which makes life worthwhile? I believe if Kennedy was alive today, he would be asking statisticians such as myself to go out and find out what makes life worthwhile.
In the years after World War II, gross domestic product, or GDP, became the gold standard for gauging a nation's overall health and productivity. But while most countries focused on industrial output, a tiny Himalayan kingdom created its own method to measure worth, gross national happiness, or GNH. Bhutan's beloved fourth king, Wangchuck, invented gross national happiness to guide his country's progress. GNH measures spiritual growth instead of rising incomes, and it relies on four key pillars: good governance, economic development, culture, and environmental conservation. Every policy proposal in Bhutan is screened by the GNH Commission, and children are taught GNH in schools. The Center of Bhutan Studies conducts a survey on various aspects of Bhutanese life. Residents are asked questions like, how often do you experience calmness, and how much do you trust your neighbors? This happiness experiment is celebrated by the international community, and other countries have even created their own ministries of happiness.
Everybody wants to live a good life, and I presume we want people in the future to live good lives. We created the Happy Planet Index really to highlight the tension between creating good lives now and good lives in the future.
Because we think people should be happy and the planet should be happy, why don't we create a measure of progress that shows that? And what we do is we say that the ultimate outcome of a nation is how successful is it at creating happy and healthy lives for its citizens.
Economic activity tends to be taken as a sign of the sort of strength and power of a nation, and yet all it is just economic turnover. What the Happy Planet Index does is it takes two things really. It's looking at the well-being of citizens in countries, and then it's looking at how many resources they use. It creates what we would call an efficiency measure. It says how much well-being do you get for your resource use. It's like a miles per gallon, bang per buck indicator.
Running horizontally along the graph is ecological footprint, how much pressure we put on the planet. More is bad. Running vertically upwards is a measure called happy life years. It's like a happiness-adjusted life expectancy. And the yellow dot there you see is the global average. The challenge really is to pull the global average up here. That's what we need to do. And if we're going to do that, we need to pull countries from the bottom and we need to pull countries from the right of the graph. And then we're starting to create a happy planet.
You can download the report, you can check out your own personal HPI score. It's the first global index of sustainable well-being.
on traditional measures, budget surpluses, people would look at us and go, you're doing okay. But we have homelessness at staggering rates, one of the highest rates of youth suicide in the OECD. Our mental health and well-being is not what it should be. So our plan is through the well-being work that we're doing, a living standards framework, and our well-being budget, where if you're a minister, you want to spend money, you have to prove that you are going to improve intergenerational well-being. We are hoping to embed in actually what the public is asking us for, to address the societal well-being of our nation, not just our economic well-being.
How have we gotten to a point where we can have high corporate profits when businesses can be doing so well, but the workers don't necessarily share in that prosperity?
Well, this has been at least a 3-decade-long trend. Now, there are a whole bunch of reasons for that. Some of it has to do with technology and entire sectors being eliminated, travel agents, bank tellers, a lot of middle management. And we had also made investments that put us ahead of the curve, whether in education or infrastructure. Those advantages went away at the same time as workers increasingly had less leverage because of changes in labor laws. You combine all that stuff and it's put workers in a tougher position. So some people who just control enormous amounts of wealth, we don't resent their success. On the other hand, just as a practical matter, you're going to have problems making sure that we're investing enough in the common good to be able to move forward.
Does this put us in a place long term where redistribution becomes, in a sense, a positive good in and of itself?
But yeah, that's always been the case, though. I don't think that's entirely new. I mean, the fact of the matter is that relative to our post-war history, taxes now are not particularly high or particularly progressive compared to what they were, say, in the late 50s or the 60s. There's always been this notion that for a country to thrive, there are some things, as Lincoln said, that we do better together than we can do for ourselves. Whether that's building roads or setting up effective power grids or making sure that we've got high quality public education and the teachers are paid enough. The market will not cover those things, and we've got to do them together. Basic research falls in that category. So that's always been true. I think that part of what's changed is that a lot of that burden for making sure that the pie was broadly shared took place before government even got involved. If you have stronger unions, then you had higher wages. If you had a corporate culture that felt a sense of place and commitment, so that the CEO, they felt a real affinity for the community to reinvest in that community and to be seen as a good corporate citizen. Today, what you have is quarterly earning reports. You have compensation levels for CEOs that are tied directly to those quarterly earnings. You've got international capital that is demanding short-term profits. And so what happens is that a lot of the distributional questions that used to be handled in the marketplace through decent wages or healthcare or defined benefit pension plans, those things all are eliminated. And the average employee, the average worker, doesn't feel any benefit.
I want to start, though, with a paradox. This shows you life expectancy against gross national income, how rich countries are on average. And you see the countries on the right, like Norway and the USA, are twice as rich as Israel, Greece, Portugal on the left. And it makes no difference to their life expectancy at all. There's no suggestion of a relationship there. But if we look within our societies, there are extraordinary social gradients in health, running right across society. This again is life expectancy. These are small areas of England and Wales, the poorest on the right, the richest on the left. Not a difference between the poor and the rest of us. Even the people just below the top have less good health than the people at the top. So income means something very important within our societies and nothing between them. The explanation of that paradox is that within our societies we're looking at relative income or social position, social status, where we are in relation to each other, and the size of the gaps between us. And as soon as you've got that idea, you should immediately wonder, what happens if we widen the differences, or compress them, make the income differences bigger or smaller? And that's what I'm going to show you. I'm not using any hypothetical data. I'm taking data from the UN, it's the same as the World Bank has, on the scale of income differences in these rich developed market democracies. The measure we've used, just because it's easy to understand and you can download it, is how much richer the top 20% than the bottom 20% in each country. And you see in the more equal countries, on the left, Japan, Finland, Norway, Sweden, the top 20% are about 3.5, 4 times as rich as the bottom 20%. But at the more unequal end, UK, Portugal, USA, Singapore, the differences are twice as big. On that measure, we are twice as unequal as some of the other successful market democracies. Now I'm going to show you what that does to our societies. We collected data on problems with social gradients, the kind of problems that are more common at the bottom of the social ladder. Internationally comparable data on life expectancy, on kids' maths and literacy scores, on infant mortality rates, homicide rates, proportion of the population in prison, teenage birth rates, levels of trust, obesity, mental illness, which in the standard diagnostic classification includes drug and alcohol addiction, and social mobility. We put them here all in one index. They're all weighted equally. Where a country is sort of average score on these things. And there you see it in relation to the measure of inequality I've just shown you, which I shall use over and over again in the data. The more unequal countries doing worse on all these kinds of social problems. It's an extraordinarily close correlation. But if you look at that same index of health and social problems in relation to GNP per capita, gross national income, there's nothing there. No correlation anymore. We were a little bit worried that people might think we'd been choosing problems to suit our argument and just manufactured this evidence. So we also looked we did a paper in the British Medical Journal on the UNICEF Index of Child Wellbeing. It has 40 different components put together by other people. It contains whether kids can talk to their parents, whether they have books at home, what immunization rates are like, whether there's bullying at school. Everything goes into it. Here it is in relation to that same measure of inequality. Kids doing worse in the more unequal societies, highly significant relationship. But once again, if you look at that measure of child well-being in relation to national income per person, there's no relationship, no suggestion of a relationship. What all the data I've shown you so far says is the same thing. The average well-being of our societies is not dependent any longer on national income and economic growth. That's very important in poorer countries, but not in the rich developed world. But the differences between us and where we are in relation to each other now matter very much. I'm going to show you some of the separate bits of our index. Here, for instance, is trust. It's simply the proportion of the population who agree most people can be trusted. It comes from the World Values Survey. You see at the more unequal end, it's about 15% of the population who feel they can trust others. But in the more equal societies, it rises to 60 or 65%. And if you look at measures of involvement in community life or social capital, very similar relationships, closely related to inequality.
The Human Development Index, HDI, understands that income isn't the only measure of human well-being. It also includes a measure of a country's health, education, and income. It's a pretty simple calculation. You take the life expectancy index, which is the average life expectancy minus 20, divided by 65, and you multiply it by the education index, which is the average of the mean years of school divided by 15 and the expected years in school divided by 18. Then you multiply that with the income index, and then you cube root it all. Simple. It's widely recognised as a more holistic way of measuring the development of a country and the well-being of its people. So let's compare Australia, a very high development country, ranked number 2, with two of our neighbours, Bangladesh, a medium development country ranked 142, and Papua New Guinea, a low development country ranked 157. When we measure the health of a country, we look at the life expectancy of its people. In Australia, life expectancy is 82.5 years. In Bangladesh, it's 70.7 years. In PNG, it's 62.4 years. When we measure the education levels of a country, we look at the average number of years a student will spend at school. In Australia, it's 12 years. In Bangladesh, it's 5.1 years. And in PNG, it's only 3.9 years. When we measure a country's income, we look at the gross national income per capita. That's the GNI. GNI per capita is the value added by each person to a country's total income divided by the total population. In Australia, it's $41,524. In Bangladesh, it's $2,713. In PNG, it's $2,453. Is it fair that a person's life expectancy or education depends on where they live? Does a wealthy country like Australia have a responsibility to work with our neighbouring countries to improve the human well-being of their people? The spatial distribution of human well-being varies across countries, within countries, and between regions. The HDI helps us to identify communities and countries that might need support in their efforts to overcome poverty. The good news is that over time, many countries are improving their health, education, and income levels. For example, look at how life expectancy, a measure of health, has increased in Bangladesh since 1980. The HDI is an important measure of human well-being. What's encouraging is that the trend in many parts of the world is positive.
Any minister who wants to deliver a bid and say, I want to spend some money here, has to show how it will benefit us at an intergenerational level. They also have to work with other ministers. So the Minister of Health might want to work with the Minister of Child Poverty and start delivering interventions that make a difference 30 years down the track. I don't think it's the end of GDP. I think it's the beginning, though, of doing things differently. And we distill it down in New Zealand just to say that for us, it's about bringing kindness and empathy to governance, and measures of wellbeing help us